I always believed that life had a way of rewarding hard work and loyalty. I thought that if I did everything right, if I built a stable home, treated my wife with love and respect, and remained faithful, then I would be given the same in return. But I was wrong. Some betrayals don't happen overnight. They build slowly, like a crack in a foundation that you don't notice until the walls start caving in. It all started on an ordinary evening. I came home from work, exhausted but content, carrying takeout from Rachel's favorite restaurant. I had been putting in extra hours lately, trying to get a promotion that would change our lives. I wanted to give her the world. But when I walked in, I felt something was off. The house smelled like perfume, one I didn't recognize. The living room was spotless, as if someone had done a rushed cleanup. And Rachel? She was sitting on the couch, her phone in her hands, staring at me like she had been caught in the middle of something. "You're home early," she said. It was 7:30 p.m. Not early at all. I set the food down on the counter, trying to ignore the way my stomach twisted. "I brought dinner. Figured we could eat together." "I already ate," she said, glancing at her phone again. That was the first sign. The second sign was the way she suddenly became protective of her schedule. Nights she used to spend with me were now occupied by plans with friends or work events. When I asked if I could join, she would give me an excuse. The third sign came a week later. A slip of the tongue. "Noah wouldn't say that," she laughed one evening while scrolling through her phone. I frowned. "Who's Noah?" She went still, just for a second, but long enough for me to catch it. "A guy from work," she said quickly. "He's just a friend." A friend. I told myself I was overthinking it. That I was being paranoid. That Rachel would never do something like that to me. But deep down, something in me knew. I could feel it in the way she avoided my touch, the way she smiled at her phone, the way her voice softened when she said his name. 2 weeks later, she confirmed what I had feared. We were in the kitchen, the smell of morning coffee filling the air. I was making breakfast, trying to hold onto the pieces of what I thought was still there. But she was quiet, distant, like a woman who had already left but hadn't said the words yet. And then she did. "I think we need to talk," she said, setting her coffee down. I turned to face her, spatula in my hand. "Okay. About what?" She exhaled, staring at the counter. "I've been thinking a lot. And I don't know if I'm happy anymore." A sharp chill ran through me. "What does that mean?" "It means I need space. Time to figure out what I want." I didn't understand at first. Or maybe I didn't want to. "Rachel, we've been married for 5 years. You don't just wake up one morning and question everything." She didn't look at me when she said it. "I think I've already figured it out." And that was when I knew. She had already made her choice. I just wasn't the one she chose. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The woman I had built my life around had just shattered it in one sentence. "I think I've already figured it out." Those words kept playing over and over in my head like a broken record, each time cutting deeper. I wanted to believe it was just a phase, a moment of doubt that could be fixed if we just talked it out. But the way she said it, the way she wouldn't look at me, told me the truth I didn't want to accept. She was already gone. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I got up, made coffee, and went about my routine as if nothing had changed. Maybe deep down I thought if I pretended hard enough, I could undo it. Maybe she would realize she was making a mistake. But she didn't. She barely said a word to me as she got ready for work, moving around like I was nothing more than a shadow in the house we built together. Then, as she reached for her bag, she hesitated. For a brief second, I thought she might say something, anything that would give me hope. But all she did was sigh and murmur, "We'll talk later." That was the moment I knew she was going to see him. I had spent weeks ignoring the signs, telling myself I was just paranoid, but not anymore. That hesitation, that guilty look in her eyes, it confirmed what I had been afraid to admit. This wasn't just space or confusion. She was leaving me for another man. I sat at the kitchen table long after she left, staring at the untouched coffee in front of me, trying to process everything. There was a dull ringing in my ears, like my body was refusing to fully register what was happening. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of memories, plans, and promises. And now I was watching it all slip through my fingers like sand. But the worst part? I didn't even know who I was without her. Rachel had been part of every decision I made, every goal I set. Everything I worked for, my career, our home, even the way I planned for the future, had been built with us in mind. And now she was ripping herself away from it all, leaving me to wonder what the hell I was supposed to do next. At some point, I don't know how long after, I grabbed my phone and did the one thing I had been avoiding. I opened her social media. I never used to check it much. I trusted her. I thought that was what love was, believing in someone without needing proof. But trust had led me here, sitting in an empty kitchen, questioning whether the past 5 years had ever meant anything to her. Scrolling through her posts, I noticed something odd. There weren't many pictures of us. Not recently, anyway. The last one she had posted with me was over a year ago. But when I looked closer, I saw his name. Noah. The friend from work. The man I had stupidly ignored when she first mentioned him. There were likes, comments, inside jokes I had never been part of. And then, buried in the middle of a group photo from a so-called work event, I saw them. Rachel and Noah. She wasn't draped all over him, but she didn't have to be. It was in the way she leaned toward him, the way he looked at her. The kind of look a man gives a woman when he knows she belongs to him. My stomach twisted. I had spent weeks, maybe even months, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. That Rachel was just going through a rough patch, that we could work through it. But seeing them together like that, even in a stupid photo, made it undeniable. I wasn't losing her. I had already lost her. And the worst part? She didn't even have the decency to admit it. The hardest part wasn't knowing she had already chosen someone else. It wasn't even the lies or the way she carried on as if I no longer mattered. No, the hardest part was waking up every day in the same house, living the same life, while knowing I had already been erased from hers. Rachel was still coming home, but she wasn't really there. I could feel it in the way she moved around the house, careful, like she was avoiding my presence. She stopped making coffee in the mornings even though it had been part of our routine for years. Her closet became a battlefield with certain outfits disappearing, ones I knew she only wore when she wanted to impress someone. The air between us was heavy, filled with unspoken words, but I refused to be the one to break first. I needed her to say it. I needed to hear her admit that she had already given herself to another man. But she never did. Instead, she acted as if she was doing me a favor by gradually leaving. It was in the small ways, the sudden solo trips to her mother's house for the weekend, the last-minute work dinners that stretched past midnight, the way she started making long calls in the car instead of inside the house. She was phasing me out of her life, one piece at a time, without ever looking back. And I let her. Not because I didn't care, but because I wasn't ready to face it. Because despite everything, some part of me still clung to the hope that she would realize what she was throwing away. That illusion shattered one evening when I made the mistake of following my gut. She had been texting more than usual that night, curled up on the couch with her phone practically glued to her hand. I could see the faint glow of the screen reflecting off her face, her lips twitching into little smiles, her eyes filled with something that had been missing when she looked at me. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the counter, forcing myself to breathe. "Who are you talking to?" My voice was calm, almost casual. She glanced up, startled, as if she had forgotten I was even in the room. Then, just as quickly, she masked it with indifference. "Just a friend." "Noah?" A flicker of something crossed her face, guilt, maybe? But then she shrugged, playing it off. "You're being paranoid." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. So when she got up to take her important call in the bedroom, I did something I had never done before. I picked up her phone. I knew the passcode. Of course I did. We had built a life together, shared everything, or so I had thought. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the screen. And then I saw it. Messages. Hundreds of them. Noah's name at the top. I didn't have to read them all to know. The words were there, glaring at me, shattering any last remnants of denial. "I miss you already. Last night was perfect. I wish I was in your arms right now." My vision blurred. My stomach turned. I had been fooling myself. She hadn't just been pulling away. She had already left. There's a moment when pain stops feeling like pain. It becomes something else, something numb, something hollow. That's what happened to me as I stood in my own home, holding my wife's phone, staring at the proof that she had already moved on. I should have felt rage, devastation, heartbreak. But in that moment, all I felt was silence. A deep, suffocating silence that swallowed everything I had ever believed about our marriage. I didn't know how long I stood there. Time felt meaningless. The only thing I could hear was the faint murmur of her voice coming from the bedroom, speaking softly into the phone, the same way she used to talk to me when we first fell in love. I walked to the doorway and watched her. She didn't notice me at first. She was too lost in him. Her back was turned, her fingers twisting the bedsheet as she whispered words I wasn't meant to hear. "I can't talk much right now." "No, he's home." "I know, I miss you too." She laughed then. A quiet, intimate laugh. The kind of laugh that used to belong to me. Something inside me cracked. I stepped forward. "Who are you talking to, Rachel?" Her entire body stiffened. For a split second, she froze, but she recovered quickly, turning around with wide eyes. "No one. Just a work call." I let out a slow breath. "Try again." She hesitated, her mind scrambling for an excuse, but she saw it then, the phone in my hand. The screen still glowing, the messages still open. The blood drained from her face. What did you do? She whispered like I was the one who had just destroyed everything. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. What did I do? I had loved her. I had trusted her. I had spent years building a future with her. And she was standing here, looking at me like I was the villain for uncovering the truth. How long? I asked, my voice calmer than I felt. She swallowed hard. Her lips parted as if she wanted to deny it, to spin some desperate lie, but she knew there was no point. I already knew. A few months, she admitted, looking away. A few months. That was worse than if it had been a drunken mistake, a one-time lapse in judgment. This wasn't just cheating. This was choosing someone else every single day while still coming home to me. So what was the plan? I asked, stepping closer. Were you going to keep lying to me? Keep playing house while sneaking off with him? Her eyes flashed with something I couldn't quite place, guilt, frustration, maybe even anger. I didn't mean for it to happen. I laughed then. A short, hollow laugh. That's what all cheaters say. She clenched her jaw. I was unhappy, okay? I didn't wake up one day and decide to do this. It just happened. Nothing just happens, Rachel. You made a choice. Over and over again. She looked away, arms crossed, like she was the one who had been wronged. That was the moment I realized she wasn't sorry. Not for the affair. Not for breaking my heart. She was only sorry that she got caught. And that's when I knew there was no saving this. There was no fixing us. Whatever love had once existed between us was gone. It had died the moment she let another man take my place. I didn't say anything else that night. What was the point? She had already made her choice. No amount of words could undo what she had done. So I left the room. I walked past her, past the life we had built, past the memories that no longer belonged to me. I went out onto the porch and sat there for hours, staring at the empty street, wondering how I had become a stranger in my own life. Rachel didn't come after me. She didn't try to explain, to beg, to fight for what we had. She just let me sit there, alone with the weight of it all. And maybe that was the answer I had been too afraid to see. She wasn't going to fight for us because she didn't want to. She had already decided. The next morning I packed a bag. Not because I had anywhere to go, but because I couldn't stand to be in that house any longer. Every corner of it felt tainted. The kitchen where we used to cook together, the living room where we curled up on the couch, the bed where we once held each other like we were all that mattered. It was all a lie now. A ghost of something that had died long before I even realized it. Rachel watched me from the doorway as I threw clothes into my bag. You're leaving? She asked, her voice careful, measured. I didn't even look at her. What else is there to do? We could talk. I let out a dry laugh. Talk? About what? How you've been sneaking around with another man for months. How you let me sleep beside you every night while you gave yourself to him. She flinched, but I didn't care. She didn't get to be hurt. Not after what she did. I never wanted it to end this way. I finally turned to her then, really looking at her. And for the first time I saw her not as my wife, not as the woman I had loved for years, but as someone else entirely. Someone I didn't recognize. You ended it the moment you chose him, I said, my voice quiet, final. This is just the aftermath. I grabbed my bag and walked out. I didn't know where I was going, and at that moment I didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't stay. I had been holding on to a marriage that no longer existed, fighting for a woman who had already moved on. And now it was my turn to walk away. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that this wasn't the end of our story. Not even close. Because life has a funny way of bringing people back together, whether they deserve it or not. Leaving wasn't the hard part. It was what came after. When I walked out of that house, I had no plan, no destination, nothing but a bag of clothes and a mind spiraling with questions I would never get answers to. The first night, I checked into a cheap motel just outside of town. I didn't sleep much. How could I? My mind kept replaying every conversation, every moment, every tiny detail I had ignored over the past year. Had she ever truly loved me? Had I been blind to it all along? I stared at the ceiling for hours, the weight of it pressing down on me like a force I couldn't shake. And then, at some point in the middle of the night, something shifted. I realized that I had spent so much time being devastated, being broken by her choices, that I had forgotten about my own. She had made her decision. Now it was time for me to make mine. So, the next morning, I got up and did something I never thought I'd do. I called the one person I had been avoiding for months. My old friend, Bennett. Bennett and I had been close for years, but life got in the way. I got married, he built his own empire, and somewhere along the way we drifted. The last time we had spoken, he had been on the verge of something huge, a business venture that would take him across the country. And now, here I was calling him, not as the stable, married man he once knew, but as a man who had lost everything. Well, well, well. If it isn't the ghost of my past, he answered, his voice light but curious. You never call. What's the occasion? Midlife crisis? Finally realized I was always the cooler one. I let out a breath, a small laugh escaping despite the weight on my chest. Something like that. You sound like hell, he noted, his teasing tone shifting into something more serious. What happened? And just like that, it all poured out. I told him everything. Rachel, the affair, the months of denial, and finally, the moment I walked out. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end. You did the right thing, he finally said. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but trust me. Walking away, that was the best thing you could have done. Yeah, well, now I'm sitting in a motel room with nothing but a duffel bag and a ruined marriage. Perfect, he said immediately. I blinked. What? It means you're free, and I might just have an offer you can't refuse. Bennett explained that his company was expanding. He needed someone he could trust, someone with a sharp mind and a drive to succeed. Come work for me, he said. Get out of that town, start fresh. You need this, man. And I need someone who isn't an idiot running things on the ground. It was a lifeline, an escape. I didn't even hesitate. I'm in. That night, I packed up my things, checked out of the motel, and drove across state lines. I didn't look back. I was done living in the ruins of my past. Rachel had chosen her new life. It was time for me to build mine. What I didn't know then was that life had a strange way of coming full circle. Because while I was moving forward, leaving her behind, she was about to realize something. She had chosen wrong. Starting over wasn't easy. I had spent so long defining myself as Rachel's husband that, for a while, I didn't even know who I was without that title. But working with Bennett forced me to remember. It was grueling. Long nights, early mornings, deals that had the potential to make or break everything we were building. And I thrived in it. There's something about losing everything that makes you fearless. I no longer worried about failing because I had already hit rock bottom. The betrayal, the humiliation, the nights spent wondering how I had been so blind. Nothing could hurt me more than that. So I poured everything into this new chapter. At first, I was just another employee, learning the ropes, keeping my head down. But Bennett saw something in me, something even I had forgotten. You're relentless, he told me one night after we closed a deal that no one else thought we could land. You don't just work hard. You work like you have something to prove. And maybe I did. Maybe I needed to prove to myself, to Rachel, to the world, that I wasn't the man she had discarded. That I was worth more than the role of the naive husband she had outgrown. Months passed and I climbed the ranks. I didn't just become successful, I became indispensable. The business grew, our network expanded, and before I knew it, I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was a force to be reckoned with. Then came the moment that changed everything. Bennett and I had been working on a massive deal for months, one that would cement our company as a leader in the industry. It was risky, high stakes, but if we pulled it off, it would change the game entirely. I was in charge of negotiations, and I spent weeks preparing, going over every detail until I could recite them in my sleep. The meeting took place in an upscale hotel conference room, the kind of place where real power was traded behind closed doors. The executives we were dealing with were sharp, ruthless, and didn't waste time with pleasantries. But neither did I. I walked into that room as a man who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. And when I walked out, I had sealed the deal that would make us untouchable. Bennett clapped me on the back as we left. That was masterful, he said. You just made us a hell of a lot richer, my friend. And just like that, I had arrived. I had spent so much time mourning the life I lost, but now, standing at the top, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. Rachel had broken me. But in doing so, she had freed me. And then, just when I thought I had left it all behind, fate decided to remind me that the past has a way of catching up. It started with a message. At first, I thought I was imagining it. My phone buzzed late at night, and when I glanced at the screen, my breath caught. Rachel. I stared at the notification, my chest tightening. After all this time, after everything she had done, she had the nerve to reach out? I almost ignored it. Almost. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened the message. I heard about everything you've accomplished. Can we talk? I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. Because of course, now that I had built something for myself, now that I was someone she couldn't ignore, she wanted back in. But Rachel had made her choice. And now it was my turn. I stared at Rachel's message for a long time, debating whether to respond. A year ago, I would have jumped at the chance. Back then, I would have wanted to know why. Why she did it, why she threw away everything we had, why she thought I wasn't enough. But I wasn't that man anymore. Instead of answering, I let the message sit there, unread. A ghost of a past life that no longer had power over me. I had spent too long chasing after closure, but the truth was I had already found it. Not in her words, not in some forced apology, but in myself. In what I had built? I wasn't her broken husband anymore. I was something much more dangerous. But as fate would have it, Rachel wasn't the type to take silence as an answer. A week later, I was at a high-profile networking event, surrounded by the kind of people who made decisions that shaped industries. I was standing with Bennett, listening to a conversation about international expansion when I felt a presence behind me. A hesitation, a wait. I turned and there she was. Rachel. She looked different. Not in the way that time changes people, but in the way regret does. There was something in her eyes, something hesitant, something lost. She had traded in the confidence she once carried for something more fragile. Hey, she said, as if we were old friends catching up. I tilted my head, taking her in. Rachel. She let out a nervous laugh, smoothing down the front of her dress. I wasn't sure if you'd even talk to me. Why would I? My voice was steady, calm. She shifted uncomfortably. I heard about everything. What you've done, who you've become. I wanted to see you. I studied her, waiting. Because we both knew that wasn't the real reason. I made a mistake, she finally admitted, her voice quieter now. I almost laughed. Which one? Her face crumpled for a second, but she quickly recovered. No, he wasn't who I thought he was. He left. Said he didn't want anything serious. And then I looked at my life, at everything I had given up, and you realized you threw away the best thing you ever had. Rachel exhaled sharply, her eyes glistening. I was stupid. I thought I needed something more, but what I really needed was you. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice so only she could hear. You had me, Rachel. And you let me go. A flicker of desperation crossed her face. I know. And I hate myself for it. She reached out as if to touch me, but I stepped back. We could try again. Just one dinner. One conversation. I just want to be in your life again. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered those nights spent alone, the doubt that ate away at me, the way she had smiled at her phone while texting another man, completely oblivious to how much she was destroying me. And I realized something: she wasn't here because she loved me. She was here because she lost. I smiled, slow and deliberate. You don't get to be in my life, Rachel. Her breath caught. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it. And with that, I walked away. Not with anger. Not with heartbreak. But with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had finally won.